Hey there, Nick Lee here with Pragmatic Works, coming at you again with another video, this one all about Power BI, and this time we are going to be talking about filters. You may think it's something simple, but it's not. It's actually kind of a hard decision. Which filter should you use? It's a tough choice. There's a lot of different reasons why you might choose different options, and we're going to run through those today to figure out which filter is going to work best for your Power BI reports. Before we begin, want to learn more about Power BI? Visit prag.works/Nick40 and you'll get a 40% discount on an annual on-demand learning subscription, and you'll get access to over 100 courses. Now on to the video. So first off, let's run through the different filter types that are available. The first filter type we're going to discuss is the filter pane. Inside the filter pane of Power BI, this is where you can create different static filters that you typically wouldn't have your consumers or your end users modifying, or if you did want your end users or consumers modifying it, then in that case, you might want to only use the filter pane if you have like too many slicers on screen. We're going to go over what a slicer is in just a moment, but if you have too many slicers that is taking up too much real estate, the filter pane allows us to have like a scrollable space where it can actually scroll up and down, unlike the Power BI report, and actually see many different filters if we need it. Typically speaking, you only use the filter pane for static filters that you're, as a designer, are developing this and making them not changeable or editable by your end users. The second filter type we're going to discuss is the slicer. Now, the slicer is great if you want your consumers, whoever's going to be consuming this report, to be able to manually change filters on a report page based on, whatever option they want to have. This way you could have one or several different slicers on your screen, choose, all right, I want to look at this demographic and this demographic and this demographic, so on and so forth, and have that all filtered down to just the relevant items there. Then we have a chiclet slicer. A chiclet slicer is extremely similar to a regular slicer. The difference, though, is that we don't have like a type of like drop down or list we can look at. Instead, it'll be a tile format. Now, you can do a tile format with a regular slicer as well, but what's special about the chiclet slicer is it allows us to add images to our tiles there, which is really neat and helpful. And the last filter type that I bet you weren't expecting is to hard code filters within DAX Measure. Well, why would you want to do this? Well, this is actually quite important because sometimes you want to apply filters within a calculated field that are different than the filters that are actually being applied on the actual Power BI report itself. As an example, what about percent of totals? Okay, so let's say we're looking at a few different countries and we want to look at always having our percent of totals being displayed properly, as in how many sales are in this country and what is this country's percent of total versus all countries. If we want to have that displayed in a measure, but still have a slicer option chosen to only look at specific countries, well, we could actually manually apply this filter in the calculation itself, which would either change or modify, add or remove other filters that exist from the actual filter or slicer that we've chosen otherwise. So let's run through all these different options together in a demo. All right, so we're going to run through all these different demo types together here. Here I am in my Power BI report. And in this Power BI report is a very simple sample data set. As you can see, I already have it stood up here. I have a year in a table, a month name, a sales territory region, which includes like countries, and then sales, and then forecast amounts. Okay, it's a very simple data set here. This is using just AdventureWorks data set. So it's pretty straightforward and good example data here. Let's take a look and see what we have going on. So if I wanted to say, all right, well, see how there's Australia, Canada, France, Germany, different regions, United Kingdom, Australia, etc. Let's say I just wanted to look at a few different countries. I could say, all right, I want this report to only show, as an example, Australia, Canada, France, and Germany. All right. So this would be like, you want your end users, you don't want them to see any of the other stuff that might exist in this data set. You only want them to see those four countries, Australia, Canada, France, and Germany. Well, then you have to decide, do you want this filter applied at the individual visual level, on the page level, or the whole report level? All right, well, let's run through the differences there. So I'm just going to make, I'm going to select my table that I have here. And I know it's selected because we have these little gray anchors on the corners of this visual. And then I'm going to scroll over here to my filter pane. So in the filter pane, this is where I could set up some static filters for my Power BI report. So in this case, I have all these, with this visual selected, I have these filters on this visual. And I can go to this sales territory region filter option, click the drop down, and it says, hey, here's all of the countries that exist for this. So what do we say? We're saying we want this visual to only show Australia, Canada, France, and Germany. And now this visual is only ever going to show those 4 countries. Pretty straightforward, right? Here's a quick tip to be able to see what filters are ever being applied on any given visual at any given time. If you hover over a visual, you see this little filter icon, and you can see right there on screen that it shows Australia, Canada, France, Germany as the options here. So now we have this applied, but this is only applied at the visual level. So as an example, if I copy and paste this visual, just to make a quick example here, and I get rid of if I clear this filter by having my new one selected, go over to my filter pane, hit the eraser to clear the filter. Now my bottom visual only has those 4 countries, but my top visual has all of the countries. All right. So do you want this filter to be at the individual visual level? That's how you would do that. Now, if I want this filter to be set up at the whole page level, as in everything on this page is going to be just those 4 countries, then I could erase my filter that's on my visual itself, and then I can have a visual selected or not. But now in the filter pane, you see filters on this page is blank. There's nothing there. So if I open up, for instance, my DEM sales territory, and I browse this open a little bit, and I look at DEM sales territory country, and add a filter on this page, now it's a filter that's being applied at the page level here. So if I look at Australia, Canada, France, and Germany as examples, now no matter what, no matter how many visuals and I put it on this page, they're all going to have this filter applied to them, where it's Australia, Canada, France, and Germany, no matter what. That's the rule of thumb here, all right? So page level, everything on this page. So now if I go back to a different page, we'll see that another visual that's exactly the same, surprise, I had a duplicate page, looks at every single different region here is currently available. All right, so it's not just Australia, Canada, France, and Germany, even though this page has the filter on it that is just those specific items. Now, the next type of item and the last type of item in the filter pane here is if I get rid of this filter that's filtered on this page and do a filter on all pages, drop in sales territory country, look at Australia, Canada, France, and Germany. Now, even no matter what page I'm on, this filter is being applied. So Australia, Canada, France, and Germany are the only options available on all of my Power BI report pages, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and delete my top visual, don't need that anymore. Another rule of thumb here, guys, if you have items on the filter pane that you plan to be static and you don't want your end users interacting with this filter pane, what I highly recommend is this tiny little eyeball at the top up here. You see where it says show or hide the filter pane from report readers. I almost always had this hidden. This filter pane almost always, or almost never rather, needs to be shown to your consumers, whoever's going to be checking out this report. There's no need for them to see it if you're setting up some static filters on visuals or page level or all pages, etc. So I typically will hide it. And once it's hidden, once you publish this to the service, this filter pane is no longer going to populate. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and clear this filter out. So that's our first type of filter that we're going to be discussing. The next type of filter we're going to discuss is a slicer. So a slicer visual, slicer visual is one of the out-of-the-box slicers that are available within Power BI. It is this icon right here. It looks like a little card visual maybe with a filter icon in front of it. Hover over it. It's called a slicer. And then in this slicer, I could add a filter to it. So it is just like any other visual. I could drag over my sales territory country to the field well, and now I have these different countries available to choose from. So I could choose Australia, Canada, France, Germany. Notice that it is all single select by default, but if I hold Control, I can multi-select. And this slicer is highly customizable. But this slicer, what it's going to do is it is only going to work on whatever page that it's on. It is highly customizable, so we can make all kinds of changes to it. So just like any other visual, if I go to my Format Paintbrush, go to Slicer Settings, I could change the style of it. I can make it a vertical list. I can make it a drop down where I can make it to where it saves a lot more real estate and just make a drop down list here. And then I could choose my different countries. I can multi-select while holding control just like before. Or I can make it go back to slicer settings, or I could make it a tile where it actually has these nice little buttons with all the different countries on it. So it is kind of relative shaping here, so you can kind of stretch it out to make it look however you want it to look. And I could choose, for instance, Australia, Canada, France, Germany, so on and so forth. That is a slicer visual in a nutshell, but to expand on the slicer a little bit more, this slicer does only work on this page itself. There are more customization options to slicers, but one that I want to point out is an option called Sync Slicers. And what this Sync Slicers does is it actually gives you the capability for a slicer to work on multiple different pages. Well, how you do that is if you go to the View tab at the top, and then you go to this Sync Slicers button all the way on the far right. Now it pulled up a new pane, as you can see. So you can see that currently this slicer is visible on page 2, and I can start adding this on other pages. So now if I go to my other page 2 that was here, notice that there's a copy of it. I know this data looks pretty much the same, but it's just an example, so bear with me on that. So if I look at this big sync slicer page, not only is it visible, it also has this sync icon checked, which means that now, no matter what option I choose on one page, so let's say I switch to just Germany, if I toggle over to a different page, just Germany is chosen. And on this other page, if I choose Canada, France, Germany as a multi-select, I go to this other page and it's also being replicated that way. Now, one more piece of customization on this sync slicer option is you actually don't have to have them all visible. So if I uncheck the visible on the other pages, and it's just visible on this duplicated page 2 example that I have here, it is just visible here, but the sync icon replicates across all pages. So notice I have Canada, France, Germany selected on page 2, or duplicated page 2. If I go to regular page 2, that slicer's not there, but it's only Canada, France, and Germany. And to double check this, remember what I said earlier, you can hover over this filter icon, see what filters are being applied, and as you can see on screen, it is showing just Canada, France, or Germany. So that's a really neat way you can utilize slicers to go across multiple pages, have nice, selection options. And it actually is a good idea, if you have multiple different filters you want your end users using, you could set up multiple slicers on the screen, something like this. Let me get rid of my sync slicers page here, and let me switch this back to, as an example, to a drop down. All right, so I have my sales territory country as a drop down slicer. Maybe I keep it at the top of the screen so it looks good. Maybe I make another slicer on the screen, put it right next to this one. I want to make it kind of maybe the same size here. So maybe something like this. Looks pretty good. It's lined up. Thank you, Power BI, for the nice snapping. And then if I go to something like, instead of sales territory country, maybe I also want to look at regions as a slicer option here. And I want to switch this to a drop down, just like the other one. So now I have both. I can look at different countries, Australia, Canada, France, Germany, and I can look at the different regions within them. But as you can see, that the regions to the countries here are exactly matching. But what happens if I scrub this and actually look at this as United States? And then I could look at the sales territory regions and see that the United States country has multiple different regions within it. So, it's kind of a design aspect. Is your data going to work well by having multiple slicers on the screen and work like that or not? So that is a design choice there. All that being said, that is it for regular slicers. So let's actually look at specifically the Chiclet slicer. Now, Chiclet slicer is not an out-of-the-box visual, but it's a really, really cool visual that gets used really often. I use it very often when I'm designing reports for customers. So Chiclet slicer is a custom visual. So how do you get custom visuals is in the visualizations pane. In the visuals section, if you click the ellipses for get more visuals, go to get more visuals, and then search for Chiclet slicer. It's actually already on screen, but I search for it anyways. Search for Chiclet. If I click it, I can add it to my report. And now I can have a slicer that's on my screen that's going to be using images. So now that I have my Chiclet slicer imported, I could find it over here in my visualizations pane under this kind of dotted line. So if I load this Chiclet slicer, notice I now have multiple fields available here. I have a category, values, and image. I care about category and image. So I have this table that exists that's called country flags. And this is a very simple table. If I look at it here, it is literally just example data that I made up, where it has it's 2 columns, it has countries in it with URLs, and that's it. It's pretty straightforward. So if we look at the relationship view, you can see that my country flags table filters down my dim sales territory table. And that's how this is working here. So if I look at my country flags table and I want to look at a category of country, and it shows these as a slicer, you can see these different options are available. I could choose different countries are available. And in this case, we know that this data actually has more than just these 4 countries. This is just example data, so bear with me here. But if I click on Canada, it still filters down all the data here to just be Canada. If I look at Australia, Canada, and France, it is just those, so on and so forth. So that looks great. But I want to add an image to this. So under this image section of the visualizations pane, if I grab the URL, add it in the image section here, now I have this nice image. It's not as adaptive as the regular slicer. As you can see, if I move it up and down, it creates like a scroll box, etc. It does take a little bit more customization to get working properly. So if I go to the format visual and I look at general, and you can see it's saying how many columns and rows do you want. So if I bump it up to 4 columns, it's going to make a nice straight line across here. And I think that looks pretty good. And maybe I want to go in here and maybe turn my header off, and it's pretty obvious that we are talking about countries in this case. Maybe I'll drag it down here, and now I could choose it based off of these images that exist, and this is even more customizable as well. If you go through all the different options that are available, you can, not that one, it's something like images. You can make them round, you could stretch them depending on the image, you could flip the image on the bottom. There's even customization options here where you could turn the text off and just show the image. You can stretch it out for the whole thing. There's all kinds of customization that's available here. I'm not going to go into that much detail on it. But this Chiclet slicer is great because we could use images such as this, and it works really well. Highly recommend it. Because I only have these 4 Chiclets on screen, maybe I do want to apply a filter level visual or a page level filter on here that is only looking at these 4 different countries, because then that would make sense. I missed it. I need to drop that to the filter pane. Filters on this page: Australia, Canada, France, Germany. So now no matter what, it's only those 4 countries, and I can use my slicer in tandem with the filter pane to make these filtering be exactly how I want it. So the last type of filter option that we have available to us that I want to talk to you guys is using a filter within a DAX calculated field. Now this is typically done in something like a measure. It is usable in like columns sometimes, but typically you apply filters at the filter level for the filter context. So for example, I can make a new calculated measure on this data. So if I go to my factor net sales table and create a new measure. Now I am going to be writing some DAX here, guys. So if you're not familiar with DAX, be sure to check out some of our other DAX videos that we have available to us. That being said, if I create a new calculation here, I could say I want to look at the sum of sales amount by a specific type of value. And that specific type of value might be something like, I want to look at the grand total for the whole month, regardless of the sales territory region. So what that's doing is removing a filter. So we're going to go through different ways we can manipulate these filters here. And this one's we're going to be removing the filter. So we're going to be removing the filter of regions. Okay. So I'm going to call this sum of sales all regions. So whenever you're manipulating filters in the filter context via a calculation, we use the calculate function. So I'm going to do the sum of the sales amount column, and I'm going to apply a filter here. Notice in the IntelliSense it's saying, what filter do you want to apply? Well, the filter I want to apply is all regions from dim sales territory region. What this is saying is any filter that's currently on sales territory region ignore it. All right, so if I hit enter here and then add this to my table, so we have the sum of sales all regions now, and we can see that grand total is 278,691.1938, right? We see that. So now if I were to guess, if we look at the years 2011 through 2011 for the month of April for all countries, I bet you if we added Australia, Canada, France, and Germany up for those first 4 records, it would come out to that 278,691. So let's double check that real quick. So if I bust open a calculator, I could see that we could do 208,695.791 plus 10,531.53 plus 26,242.8064 plus 33,221.0664. And we see we come out to that same exact value, 278,691.1938. That looks perfect. So we know our calculation did work correctly there. So that looks good. So this is good to have the sum of sales all regions if you were going to do something like a percent of total. So as an example of percent of total, what I could do is I could create another new measure here in my table, and I could create this like sum of sales, or maybe call it percent of total sales by region. All right, so maybe that's my measure name here. So percent of total sales by region. So what I could do is I could say now I could do the sum, I could divide the sum of the sales amount column by this measure I just created, sum of all sales regions, sum of sales all regions, hit enter, add this, and we get this percentage value. I can switch this to an actual percentage, maybe make it 0 decimals, and it looks good. So what I could do here is say 208,695.791. I can now divide 208,695.791 into 278,691, get that 75% value, 10,531 divided by 278,691 is going to give us 4%. We could double check that real quick as well with a little bit of napkin math here. So if I do 10,531.53 divided by 278,691.1938, we can see it comes out to 0.037, which is roughly equal to 4%, which is exactly what we get here. So we know this calculation works fantastic. So in this specific use case, we removed a filter, but you could also add filters as well. So as one more quick example here on this, I could say, what if I wanted to add a filter, maybe specifically to one region? So I could do sum of sales Australia as an example. I could use that calculate function just like we did before, do the sum of the sales amount column, and add a filter where the sales territory region equals Australia. So here it is. This is adding a filter where it equals Australia. It's just like clicking the button, right? So if I add this filter, drop it onto my visual, we can see now that this 208,695.791 is replicated across to the sum of sales Australia for every field because it's specifically where it's Australia. So maybe Australia might be your leader in sales and you know it's going to be your leader. So you want to compare every other country to Australia. That's when you would add this filter in DAX. And just one more quick DAX example of just showing why you would do this is what if we did percent of Australia as a measure. And in this case, we could do something like divide the sum of sales amount, just like we did before. But this time, our denominator is going to be the sum of sales Australia. And again, we're going to make this a percentage with no decimal values. And now we could see that it is this sum of sales amount column divided by sum of sales Australia to get this percent of Australia value that exists. So now we can compare every other country we have to Australia. And of course, Australia divided by Australia is going to give you that 100% value. When I build Power BI reports for customers or I help customers build Power BI reports, I am always implementing not just one, not just two, but at least 3 or 4 of these different options every time I build a report. You should use all of them because it's all an important part of your toolkit to have successful Power BI reports built for you in your future. So I hope you found this video helpful on choosing which type of filter will be best fit for your scenario. Let me know down below what you think, if this was helpful for you or not, and I will see you next time.